President Biden thinks a rail strike has been averted. But do rail workers agree? As reported by Labor Notes' John Furman, only one union would have to vote against the White House's tentative agreement to shut down a substantial amount of freight rail traffic and spark a crisis in the supply chain. We're joined now by General Secretary of Railroad Workers United and Amtrak engineer Ron Kaminkow, along with Editor-in-Chief of the Real News Network, Max Alvarez. Welcome to you both.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Ron, I'll start with you. Describe the situation to me right now as you see it. We're all, obviously, I think everyone does not want to see a strike if it can possibly be avoided because of the, catastrophe that would be economically. But where are we? And is the picture not as rosy as the Biden administration or the news are making it out to be?
Well, what happened on Friday was basically we were coming down to the wire, the end of the 30-day cooling off period. And the powers that be, the union leadership, of course, and the Democratic Party, and one could say the country, whatever that means in general, would like to have avoided a strike. And so they managed at the last moment to hammer out a tentative agreement. And three of the stickling points were the harsh attendance policies, the inability to take time off for medical personal reasons, the lack of paid sick time, and no semblance of a schedule for most railroad workers in train and engine service who work over the road. So there was some degree of concession there, but it was also offset by some of the things that the rail carriers won, such as self-protecting pools. So the devil's in the details, and right now it's just not clear. Especially since no one, and the unions have said this, no one has actually seen the final language. So right now it's sheer speculation on the part of the rank and file of the operating crafts as to, is this good, is it bad, or is it ugly? So a strike is still possible because the rank and file have the last word, and that vote will not come for some time yet.
Max, I saw Jonah Furman, for example, on Friday warning that there was some risk in the media covering this as like a crisis averted because that lets the pressure off that the striking workers are obviously trying to build. And if people feel like this is a crisis that's largely in the rearview mirror, they basically don't have as much leverage in terms of arguing for the various scheduling and time off protections that they're looking for. What's your read on how this is going? Do you think it was a strategic move on the part of the Biden administration and some more corporate media figures to go ahead and frame this the way that it's been framed, given that the language is still out and the jury is still out?
So, I definitely think it is strategic on the side of the Biden administration because, Biden's polling numbers had managed to kind of bounce back. There was obviously a lot of fear that Democrats were headed walking like headfirst into a bandsaw for the midterm elections. And then, the polling numbers for Democrats started to jump up over the course of the summer. They don't want to lose any of that momentum, and a national rail shutdown, which would have catastrophic economic consequences, if that was blamed on the workers and implicated, and Biden was implicated for being nominally pro-union, Republicans would have that to kind of rail about in the lead up to the midterm elections. As far as the media is concerned, I don't know how strategic it is because I think in order for there to be a strategy, they actually have to know what they're talking about. And sadly, what I've realized is most people in the mainstream media have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to labor relations, especially labor relations on the railroads. We saw this in the week leading up to the deadline after which rail strikes could be initiated by the unions or rail lockouts could be initiated by the rail carriers. That was last Friday, that was the deadline. And, the mainstream media had largely been ignoring this story all year, but we had been covering it at the Real News, and Jonah Furman and the folks at Labor Notes have been doing a great job of covering it as well. But it's been largely flying under the radar. And until we were at the moment of crisis, then everyone started taking an interest. And I think what was really clear at that point was just, again, how paltry our general understanding of how these things work is, because we kept talking about the devastation of a rail strike. It was all about what are the workers going to do to disrupt the supply chain. at the very moment that rail carriers were holding the supply chain in our economy hostage by illegally initiating soft lockouts before the actual deadline when they could do such things. So they were basically threatening Congress, threatening the economy. This is what a rail shutdown would look like if you don't cave to our demands and give us what we want. So the quick answer to your question, Bree, is that the crisis averted narrative is wrong in two senses. One, it's wrong, as Ron said, that we have averted a rail strike, because that may still very much be in the cards. The unions have not actually seen the details of this tentative agreement. They still have to vote on it, and they may vote it down, and it may only take one union voting it down for this to kind of really kick off. What we know, and we don't know what's in that agreement. What we know for sure is that the cooling off period has been extended, so the energy that had built up and folks were ready to strike, that is kind of put on the back burner. And the other crisis is that none of this has addressed the real crisis on the supply chain, which has been caused by corporate greed that has reduced quality of service on the freights, reduced quality of life for workers on the freight railroads, at the same time that rail carriers have been jacking up prices on everybody and stuffing their wallets with stock buybacks and dividend payouts.
Yeah, Ron, what do you think about the coverage from the mainstream media? Do you agree with Max?
Yeah, I mean, it was so glossed over as to be either out of ignorance or it was just disingenuous on the part of a lot of the players on Friday, because we were talking about actually three unions, the two unions of the operating crafts, which are big, and then the Brotherhood of Railway Signalmen, which is a much smaller organization. That's three of them. There's 9 others. And of those 9 others, we know that at least one at this point, the rank and file of the IAM, International Association of Machinists, voted their tentative agreement down by almost a 2-to-1 margin. And they have, the leadership of IAM agreed to extend the cooling off period to September 29th. And technically on September 29th, that union could go on strike. The electricians, which did a paper ballot, IBEW, it's my understanding that they expect to have the results of their plebiscite at that exact same time. And so we could actually see 2 unions potentially call a strike on the 29th. We don't know, but that's an option. And if they were to strike, the unions of the operating crafts, as well as every other craft union out there, the assumption is that the rank and file would refuse to cross the picket line, just like was done in 1992, and we would have a national shutdown.
Ron, given how significant this particular industry is to the economy, some people on the left have been asking why it is that there would even be a question that a tentative agreement like the one that was reached on Friday would offer so little in terms of concessions to workers. The tentative agreement involved, I believe, 1 vacation day. Is there a conversation happening about whether or not this moment should be used to ask for more? And if not, is it because there are concerns about how much the American public, having largely been dissuaded from union support as compared to what it used to be in the past, will not support railway workers going forward if they ask for anything more than the bare minimum?
Well, there's huge discontent out there. And, from the opinion poll that we ran about a month ago now, every craft, every union, every seniority group, and every age group responded with over a 90% response rate that they were not happy with the PEB recommendations, and an even higher response rate in the mid around 95, 96% that railroad workers should exercise their legitimate right to strike. So just from those numbers, we know that there's a huge amount of discontent out there in the rail industry. And of course, it's not just in the rail industry, it's amongst the working class in general, and that's been evidenced by what's going on at places like Target and Starbucks and Walmart and Amazon and so forth. So there's an unprecedented, in effect, uprising of working class people in this country who have said, we deserve more. And so what we're seeing is rank and file workers taking the bull by the horns and actually calling for actions in the form of pickets all across the country. And this is going to come as early as this coming Wednesday. This is not something that has been called by the official union leadership. And this isn't something that has been called officially by Railroad Workers United. This is a groundswell, grassroots, rank and file movement that is taking hold in this country right now. And we're expecting to see pickets at dozens, if not scores, and ideally hundreds of rail terminals all across the country this Wednesday. And there's talk about this escalating to the point where potentially doing this every week, potentially having a much larger mass day of action as the contract thing starts to wind its way through the fall and things start to heat back up again. So it remains to be seen exactly, what form that discontent will take, but we know it's out there. It's palpable. It's in the air.
Well, Max and Ron, thank you so much for joining us to shed more light on the situation. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising in just a minute. Stay with us.